what was like the biggest lie that industry told itself during that period that indie devs are still paying for today?
Many studios believe that if they have a compelling trailer or if their game have a very big wish list number, there will always be funding. They can always get more money. In reality, people want to see result. People want to see whether you're profitable or not.
What are the biggest mistakes game developers make when they're trying to prove validation?
I think the biggest mistake developer make is thinking validation begins at launch.
What are the costs that developers will always forget to put in their budget that eventually could lead to failure?
One thing that people always forget as an indie studio is the publisher cost, whether it is a project manager, whether it's a community manager, or whether it is QA, whether it's localization. So there are a lot of stuff that a publisher would put in that you're as an indie developer wouldn't be aware of.
You're listening to Game Dev Epic Fails by Ludo Launchpad, the podcast where we dig into the biggest struggles and the hardest lessons behind the games we love. I'm your host, Jet Tanyag. Today's guest is Tidus Wong, the head of finance at Agora Gaming Partners. So in this episode, we are pulling back the curtain on the world of finance in indie game development. Tidus and I talked about the hidden costs that leak out of every indie budget. We discussed the predatory red flags that you need to watch out for from publishers and investors. We also talked about why influencers might be spoiling your narrative game's revenue. So this episode is very packed and ruthlessly realistic about what it takes to be financially sustainable in today's cutthroat indie market. So you'll definitely finish this episode with tons of new knowledge about how money works in the world of indie games. So without further ado, here is Tidus Wong. So, hello, Tidus. Thank you very much for being here and welcome to the show.
Likewise, happy to be here as well.
Yeah, all right. So, let's start with a little bit with your previous roles. Since you moved from finance manager at Global Top Round to becoming head of finance at AGP, Agora Gaming Partners, how has your view of a successful game shift now that you're looking at through the lens of mergers and acquisitions instead of just like early stage acceleration?
I think let's start with at Global Top Round. So the success was pretty straightforward at the time. We helped indie game studio get their publishing deal and then launch the game to the market, and we consider that as a success because we're a acceleration investor. So we help them to further their growth in an explosive speed. So we help them to survive long enough to find the right partner and then of course reach it to the market. So that's Global Top Round. And Agora is a little bit different now. So we zoom out from that particular aspect and then look at the bigger picture from a M&A and strategy perspective. So instead of asking that, can this game actually launch into the market? We're more like asking that, how can we help the studio to become better instead of just launching the game? How do we help them to look for better funding? Or maybe expanding the scope of the game if they have a very good IP. Or if, let's say, if a studio that already have a back catalog with some proven success, now they're looking to scale. How are they scaling? Whether they need to just want to quit the gaming industry, that could be one of the options. So they want to sell the IP, we can help on the M&A side. Or if they want to acquire new IP and combine with their existing catalog to make a new game, that is where we come in. So in the last 2 years since Agora founded, we have been growing rapidly. Instead of just focusing in M&A, we have launched AGP Asia. So we help publishing in China region. We have a joint venture with Pix Capital called Ichiba, focused in last mile funding for PC and console titles. We also run our own event department, which is led by myself and Matthias, who's my partner, where we help indie developers to bring their games into bigger stage and then work with local government to support and accelerate their regional game ecosystem. So I think the biggest shift between Global Round and Agora is that we change the definition of success where we no longer focus in a small part of the ecosystem. Now
Mhm.
we're moving towards a bigger stage and help to build something that is sustainable and also helping the passionate team behind a great game.
All right. So between 2020 and 22, money was just like everywhere in the game development industry. And now the faucet has turned off, period. So what was like the biggest lie that industry told itself during that period that indie devs are still paying for today? And then what is Agora Gaming Partners doing to help indie game developers and help the industry in general be able to fix that downtrend?
During that time, because there's so many easy money and also because of how COVID has helped for the industry to bloom, everybody was at home playing games. And
Mm-hmm.
also there's a period where cryptocurrency was also blooming. So there's a lot of easy money that was available. So we call it the capitals, cheap capitals. Investors are chasing like what's the next big hit.
Mm-hmm.
And many studios believe that if they have a compelling trailer or if their game have a very big wish list number, there will always be funding. They can
Mm-hmm.
always get more money. So that was the mentality at the time. And the biggest lie is that now in reality, people want to see result. People
Mm-hmm.
want to see whether you're profitable or not. Like we're seeing the consequences of like studio that has been building in their narrative, their story of raising equity,
Mm-hmm.
and then suddenly now investors want to see that you are actually sustainable. So they are adding more metric into the model to or in the narrative of like how can you sustain in today's environment if you're in the team. It's not just about securing the funding.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't just mean that if you get the fund, you will automatically build a good game or a profitable game. There's like many more due diligence comes after that needs to be answered first before investor willing to put money into your game studio. So overall, I think the industry is kind of correcting back to fundamental. People want to see that whether you have a healthy cash flow, whether you have a good budget
Mm-hmm.
and expectation whether it is achievable or not.
I see. I see. So does that mean like in this era, wish lists are like no longer the only metric? And I think a lot of indies would say this, like they're always saying, get wish list velocity. But right now, I guess it's not the only important thing for indie
Yes,
developers
it
to think
is
about.
is no longer one and only metric
Mm-hmm.
because a few years ago people were relying on just the wish list. And of course there's like Discord channel as well that you measure the community of how active they are. But then that is a minority metric. Now it is more like what is a content creator take of the game, what is their community feedback of your game, and as well as whether you have a community on your own or not, a Discord server or a Reddit channel. Like there's so much more metric that gets into play other than just wishlist. But of
Mm-hmm.
course, having a wishlist does help, but it's not the one and only.
I see. I see. And I think that's something that indies should really take note now because a lot of people are talking about just a wish list, but there's a lot of things that's going on in there that they need to see. Next up, in recent industry deep dives, we've heard that the investment landscape is shifting from like pure VC to acquiring profitable studios with strong IP, just like you mentioned. Without mentioning names, in your current deal flow, can you give a figure of how many games are actually sustainable versus those that have been zombies or breaking even but not growing?
So this is very hard to put a number onto it because
Mm-hmm.
of there's so many variable that is in play. So the honest answer that I can give is that the sustainable hit rate is very, very tiny or small.
I see.
So generally what I see in the past is that, especially with my last company at Global Top Round, is we invest 10 studio every single year. And
Mm-hmm.
usually out of the 10, one or two will be sustainable. And by sustainable, is either they launch their game or they're doing a side job like work for hire to continue sustain to develop their own IP. And out of the 10, there are like one or two that who launch the game that might break even. So that is what I call the zombie tier, because that they they make it to the launch, they launch it to the market, but they're not making too much money. So
Mm-hmm.
on an investment perspective is that they didn't lose money, but they also don't generate enough to grow the studio to go for the next project. And then of course out of the remaining one, unfortunately they just like disappear because that they couldn't continue to work on the next project. They couldn't even finish the current project and they just gave up. They go for either disband the studio or they move on from the industry. So that's why that now the investment market is shifting towards studio with a proven IP. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, I understand that in the studio doesn't have a proven IP yet. So another take would be fresh IP with smaller investment ticket. And by smaller investment ticket, it is usually sub 1 million investment.
Another question in the line of this one, like, because does that affect publishers as well? Are publishers also affected by that? Especially if a publisher took in the game and then the game launched, it became a zombie game. So the studio doesn't get the money they have out of it, but the publisher also doesn't get anything because it just like breaks even or didn't grow.
Yes, of course, because it is at the end of the day, it's a partnership. So the publisher will also put in, if let's say that you negotiate a deal with an MG, they will put in cash in the studio as well to further development, or whether it is a marketing commitment, they put in the marketing effort as well. So there are resources that the publisher put in, and if they are unable to recoup with this kind of zombie tier, then it is a failed
Mhm.
investment.
I see. I see. Recently, we still see devs asking for like $2 million for a debut indie title, which is too much. From a finance perspective, walk through us why that number often guarantees a failure before the game would even launch.
It's actually a very direct answer. So when a first time indie team asks for 2 million to build their own debut title, the issue isn't about their ambition or their passion. It's just pure math. You just have to do some calculation on it. So let's say that if a publisher invests the 2 million into the game, right? The game need to generate 6 to 8 million in revenue to justify the risk, because that imagine that you have 6 to 8 million in revenue. There is platform fee they need to deduct, so usually it's around 30%, and there's like marketing spend, and then of course there's the recoup that depending on the deal that you sign with the publisher. So you only get the money after all this deduction. So that means that this game needs to have like so roughly 200 to 300,000 unit at around, I would say, $25 to $30. So imagine that kind of amount with that price point, and now you're a small indie team that has not made any game before. It is a difficult target, especially with a new IP from a small unproven team. So this create a trap where the budget is so high, it requires an outcome that is unlikely able to achieve to break even. Of course, that you could argue with me that there's always outlier, but we're not talking about the outlier, right? We're talking about a finance perspective that the base rate of the probability of this kind of cases that hitting the investment return is very low, which means that it's a very high risk setup to meet the expectation that is required.
All right, yeah. Speaking of outliers, at the top of my head, I'm thinking like Among Us, those types of games that came in like really very late, and during the pandemic even, just to be able to like hit the ground running. But before that, they were like in Steam for a very long time. So speaking of very long times, at Arctic Game Dev last year, the concept of inception publishing was thrown in, which is like building marketing evidence from day one. That was the major theme during that time. And It's actually what we do with our partner devs here in my company, Ludo Launchpad. So, what are the biggest mistakes game developers make when they're trying to prove validation before they've even finished the vertical slice?
I think the biggest mistake developer make is thinking validation begins at launch.
Mm,
So I like the idea of what we did during the Game Dev 2025 of the Inception publishing is it flips the idea. So
yeah.
it tells people that validation should begin the moment development starts. So you need to have some proven data that there's demand by measuring early signals. So some of the early signals is that we talk about wish list, right? So that is one of the metric. Community engagement, this is
Mm-hmm.
why you have Reddit or you have a Discord, Blue Sky. So you have a community that want to buy your game.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like Steam Next Fest with a demo performance. So you're able to put it out there and people were able to comment whether they like the mechanic that you're building, the game that you're building. There's the content creator traction. So if you're doing a small influencer campaign to test out whether there's actually a market out there for your game, that is another type of market validation. And then the last would be what we always do is market comparables. Like in the
Mm-hmm.
last 5 years, is there any game or game mechanic alike that what you're building? So let's say Bilateral that got very popular during the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say now you're building a game that is similar to Bilateral, then there's already Bilateral that shows that there's a market for it. Now you're just building something similar instead of you're saying that I want to make a poker game but with animals. So it's like a new different type of genre that you don't have a market comparables to compare with. So I think
Mm-hmm.
the mistake here is that many developers make it presenting the concept very passionate about, but they forgot to check whether there's a market to it. And of course, there we can see that I'm not sure if I'm gonna get canceled after saying this. So we can
Okay.
see that why Concord was canceled because that the
Mm,
game was made with an audience that not really exists.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Concord is something that I covered in depth with a previous guest that because the devs just like went in stealth mode and then suddenly surprised everyone with this new FPS game in a sea of tons of already like market deep penetrating FPS games, it was like bound to fail. Speaking of like validation as well, especially for games, because when you go to the like up wider spectrum of startups, validation is also something being done like at the very early stages. In the gaming industry, I think the closest thing that we had back there was like hyper casual games where they do CPI tests before and then kill the project if the CPI isn't low enough. So would indie games have that some sort of like a standard metric that would apply to all, or is it all going to depend on the type of market that people aim for?
On that, so the major difference here is that CPI is mostly relevant for mobile games because of
Mm-hmm.
how heavy UA it needs to be and how competitive the market is. Where PC console is just fundamentally different. So imagine that a mobile game you could make that in a couple of months, but a PC console game you require at least 12 months minimum, and it
Mm-hmm.
could go up to 2 to 3 years at least to make a good PC console game. Which is why the metric here is completely different. And one of the nowadays a little bit more trendy is the community because of like
Mm-hmm.
the long period of time that goes into making a PC and console game. If the community has been there since day one, it means that they really like what you're doing. They really want to play what you're building, and they would put in money to buy the game that you're making. So
Mm-hmm.
that would be a much more important metric if I have to put it against like a CPI.
All right, sounds good. So let's move on to the next part. So Some of your colleagues noted that short narrative driven games are struggling to find investment. So, have you seen a studio fail because even if they had a very beautiful narrative game, but they cannot like build the replayability around it, so they failed?
Yes, actually. So I have seen a studio where they build very beautiful story-driven game with, of course, narrative that receive very good review, but still struggle financially because that once player finish the story, the engagement stop.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why, in comparison to a high replayability, a more systematic game has a continued engagement is much more successful. So one game that we invest in the past is called Dodon,
Mm-hmm.
which is published by Focus Entertainment. You can look into it. It is a very beautiful hand drawn art with a narrative story behind it. But the problem is that once an influencer play it online, everybody knows about the story now. They wouldn't want to buy it because it just doesn't stick. The last time I checked on Gamalire, they sold like 6K unit, which is okay, but not good. I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't say that it's like super successful in a way. So that's why the investors tend to favor system games,
Yeah,
roguelike,
systemic games, roguelikes,
yeah,
deck builders. Yeah.
yeah, deck builder, simulation, because they create the replayability. Like there's more long tail monetization that goes into it instead of a narrative game. What can you do with it's just a narrative genre? There's so little that you can do with. But this is the so called favorite answer in the gaming industry. It all depends, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's
Yeah.
no there's no one answer justify everything. So what I even though that what I say just now doesn't mean that there's no successful title in narrative game, but they often require very strong IP or combined with good game mechanic or
Mm-hmm.
replayability to make it successful. Some title that I could think of right now is like Detroit Become Human. So it
Mm,
has
yeah.
a very good story, but they add in replayability because of the story choices that you can make with each playthrough. Even though that
Yeah.
you see a streamer or an influencer finish their own playthrough, you want to buy the game and play it yourself to make your own decision. So there's the replayability that attached to it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Another one I could think of To the Moon. So To the Moon is a narrative game with very little gameplay, I would say, but it has a very strong emotional IP.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you watch an anime called Stein Gate before. So it has a very
Familiar.
very similar emotional feel to it. So it gives you a strong punch of like the emotional feel where is a strong IP. So whenever there's
Mm-hmm.
a memorable element in there, I would consider it as a strong IP.
All right, that's interesting. Just to linger on that a little bit. So the strategy of taking micro influencers is backfiring on like narrative driven games because the influencers will show this is the storyline, therefore like, it's already finished. Now you won't play it anymore because you already know the story. That is interesting for indie game developers. Have there been successes even if like on a single player single story? Because come to think it, for example, The Last of Us is a but that is an outlier, that's triple A. But have there been like indies that like a one straight playthrough with not much variance on the gameplay but still managed to be a success?
I think the closest that I could think of is To the Moon because it doesn't
Mm,
have that many variation.
decisions, yeah. I think if the story would be so good that people will not want to be spoiled is something that could be in there.
Just to add here, as long as that it is attached to the feeling, and of course that it comes down to it kind of contradict with what I just say as well. So look at this way: a narrative is more like a storytelling, right? As long as the story is interesting enough, and then there's a choice to be made, you would it would always sell because
Yeah.
you want to be the main character of the story. That's why choice matters.
Yeah, yeah. I think it all boils down there, the player agency, choice, and if people don't find that in your game, even if they saw it from others, they probably wouldn't buy. All right, that's a good one right there. So let's move on to the next one. Like, what are the costs that developers will always forget to put in their budget that eventually could lead to failure, like QA, localization, platform fees, etc.?
There's always different stuff that happen when what you budget compared to the actual production. But on a general line is that one thing that people always forget as an indie studio is the publisher cost. So when you talk with a publisher, you have to be aware that they are your partner. They are putting in resources on their own as well. Other than giving you a MG straight cash, they are assigning human resources to your game as well, whether it is a project manager, whether it is a community manager, or whether it is QA, whether it is localization. So there are a lot of stuff that a publisher would put in that you're as an indie developer wouldn't be aware of. And of course there's like other costs like platform cut that if you put it on Steam, you need to remember that. It's not like you put a $20 price tag, you're gonna receive $20 back. The tax, the buffer for the runway. So one thing that a lot of studios that we see is that they make a production budget without buffer. So imagine that now you launch the game on Steam. It takes a quarter before Steam pays out, or like at least 1 to 2 months depending when you launch it, right? So before the money hit your bank, you still need some cash to run the studio before the game actually generate the cash that you needed. So we always advise people to have buffer in the production project. Of course, this buffer can sometimes be utilized in extreme scenario where you might under budget or you're over scoping as well. But generally, that is what we see. And of course, what you mentioned is for localization. A lot of people doesn't understand that localization doesn't just simple translation that you throw to AI and translate. It's more like a cultural adaptation. So you need to hire a human touch to it. And then marketing costs. A lot of people that only take into consideration of production costs, especially the studio who want to do self-publishing. They always forget about marketing costs because the development itself is literally just half of the battle. Because after
Yeah.
you finish the game, discovery is comes after how people know about your game, and then that require you to put in marketing effort, and that comes with money as well.
Yeah.
I think generally here what I see is like it could add up to 30-40% of the initial development budget, I would say. Yeah.
I see. And it's something that really, and a lot of indies would say, like, we're not good at marketing, and then try to find a publisher to do the marketing for them. But I guess in today's landscape, that initiative should start from them and not the publisher itself. At least it helps the public. Correct me if I'm wrong, but at least that outreach that they do at the start is also something that the publishers now want to see, because they want to like see less risk and see that there's a semblance of an audience for this game.
Yes, so that's why that the metrics that I mentioned earlier would be so important, because there's so many games out there, and then because of so many people developing game, nowadays the publisher would review your game when you have a vertical slice.
Hmm.
It's because there are so many studios out there that is like at vertical slice stage, which is better than a paper pitch. So most
Yeah.
of the publisher doesn't look at paper pitch anymore, or in another way to say is that they just don't have the time. Even ourselves, we receive so many pitches in our inboxes that if we see a paper pitch, we would say that come back when you have a view. So that
Yeah.
even though that we like the concept, we like the idea, but there's just lower risk opportunity out there. So it just make it seem like we are forcing people to make a vertical slice, but in the other way around is that because there are better opportunity when people send us vertical slice to lower down the risk.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good. Okay, quick pause, because this is super relevant to what we're talking about. So most of us have this fear. You spend 3 years building your dream game in stealth mode. You're gonna hit publish on Steam and then absolute silence. You've wasted your time, your money, and your reputation on a bet that nobody actually wanted to play. So this is why exactly we built Ludo Launchpad. We take out the guesswork and stop you from building in the dark. We help you validate your game before you burn your next year of runway. So if you've been sitting on a concept, a prototype, or even an idea that you could explain in one sentence, go ahead, pitch it to Ludo Launchpad at pitch.ludolaunchpad.com. That is pitch.ludolaunchpad.com. Pitch us your game, and let's turn that uncertainty into validation. All right, back to the episode. Next up, using the concept of like the leaky eight pipeline as an analogy, where do you see the most money leaking out of a studio's budget? Is it overscoping or maybe failure to understand their own finances?
So on this comes with a lot of different areas. So the first area will be under budget. That
Mm-hmm.
has happened with a lot of indie studio, which is not like the end of the world. It usually happens. And then when this happens, if you already signed with a publisher, talk with the publisher to how to revise the milestone plan and potentially get more money from them to
Mm-hmm.
sustain and then ship the game. Of course, this also means that you have to potentially renegotiate the deal terms.
Mm-hmm.
And another one would be unable to hire the talent within the budget range.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're making a game, it's not just a few person or even two person or one person can make it. There's always a team behind it. And with that said, it means that you need people in different area of expertise. So even though that you hear story about like this game was developed by a single developer, was developed by two person, they hire outsource, they hire contractor. So a lot of time is that they were thinking they could hire, let's say, a sound engineer with X amount of money, but in the end they couldn't, so they have to like increase the budget. And we see that there's where some of the budget get burned in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
And on contrast, so one of the game studio that I worked in the past before I joined, they had a marketing budget for UA. And when after I joined, I see that why was there no marketing at all? It's because that the director has blew away the budget by bringing the team out to party every single week to keep the
That
morale up.
is no, that's
So
horrible.
that happens as well. So
Yeah.
it's like a lot of different take can happen, and which is why when we invest, we always do due diligence and also periodical call to get update. We want to know that what has been spent. We want to know that what is going on, how the development is looking like per se.
All right.
With that said, of course, the financial visibility is the most important thing, and many studio doesn't track their burn rate, doesn't track the revenue projection, which I just mentioned about the buffer. Without this kind of clear financial position, it's very hard to make a decision because it become a much more like emotional decision rather than a strategic decision.
All right. I see. I see. So let's move on to the next part. So Pontus mentioned that properly localizing for China alone can contribute to like around 20 to 40% of global sales. So has there been a developer who failed because they ignored the Asian market and left practically half their potential revenue on the table? So, and then why is, and you mentioned before earlier as well about localization, it's more than just translation. So, why is simply translating something not enough?
So I don't have the data where a developer have ignored China and they get less in revenue, but then that is an assumption that we can safely do by just looking at the Steam review. So just to answer the question is that localization is not just translating the text. Because if you want to do that, you could just use Google Translate and translate, and you would kind of understand what does it means. But when you actually play a game, you want to understand the culture behind it. You want to understand the character. You want to understand the tone. The word that was used in the narrative of the story is very important. And of course, that comes down to the platform strategy and as well as distribution partnership. You may want to do merge, or you may want to do like how to market your game as well. So an example is that China has a very specific regulation when you want to publish the game in China. So you cannot have blood in your game, and if there is blood, it cannot be red, for example. And then
Mm-hmm.
these are stuff that you cannot use Google and then translate.
Yeah.
So these are the cultural difference that you need to understand. There are two games that launched recently that we can see there's audience for it. If let's say that they did not have Chinese localization, they won't have that particular market. So Lost and Found is one of it. Yesterday when I checked, they had like 33% review that is from using simplified Chinese. So you could see like 100% of the review, 33% of people who bought the game
Mm-hmm.
is using Chinese as the main language. So if you're not having that as a language for localization, you will lose like 33% of it. Same goes for Reanimal. I was checking on their stat. 20% of the review was using simplified Chinese. So again, same assumption. If let's say that your game doesn't have a simplified Chinese localized, you wouldn't able to sell it to 20% that I just mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in
Yeah.
comparison, you lose the sales in that region.
Of that 20%. Yeah, interesting. Which is why like it's so it's super important to like learn proper localization of games. Next up, have you ever passed on a game? So let's talk about like some of deals or maybe some misses. Have you ever passed on a game that went on to become a hit? And what did you miss at the start? And what does that teach developers about the subjective side of funding?
Uh, it's safe to say that every investor has passed on something that later becomes successful. An example would be, I think Core Keeper. We seen Core Keeper in the past before they got signed with Fireshine, but we had to pass is because that it was wrong timing of like how our strategy, our investment strategy at that time with previous company. Why it's so subjective is because that every VC investor, angel investor have their own timing for investment. Sometimes it's the studio themselves that pivoted the project. So initially, if let's say they pitched just project A, we were interested, but we don't have the capacity to invest. And then now we talk with them again because they didn't get the funding they need. They pivoted to a second project, and that's it. And then sometimes it's just that the market evolve too fast. So
Yeah.
people would love extraction shooter now, they might not love it 2 years down the line. They might change to a different genre like Electro, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a hard quantify question. And the lesson here for developer is that the funding decision is not really just objective. It's
Mm-hmm.
very subjective as well. It's a mix of the data, the market timing, the strategy, and as well as if let's say you're talking with publisher, their pipeline. Because each publisher have their own capacity as well. If they're already signed 5 game and they can only handle 5 game in a year and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the pitch that has been, what's the English word, has been very well lesson for the developer is that if from Focus the game that he signed majority was a continued conversation from past. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
new lead that sent to his inbox and not like a new faces that he met in the game event and then he literally signs it.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the game are from continuing conversation in email, in game event. Possible that they met in 2024 and they only signed in 2026. So this kind of stuff is very subjective. A no right now doesn't mean that it's a no in future. It
Mm-hmm.
just means that it's not the right fit right now. it doesn't mean the game itself lacks potential.
Speaking of that last part that you said, a deal right now could have been conversations that started way back 2024. And as I see a lot of indie game developers, a lot of them would just focus on their game and tell other people that we are introverts and we are not good at networking. But how important it is, like, especially for indie game developers, you're the one making a game. How critical is networking going to be for them, especially in today's game development landscape?
It's very, very important. So one of the reason why Mateus and I has been doing the event division is that we want to create this kind of networking opportunity between the studio and the publisher and investor. So think of this way, right? With what I just mentioned, that most of the deal that gets signed is a continued conversation because of you need to see this person passion of the game. You need to see that this game is progressing instead of a paper pitch. So when you first pitch me, it might be a paper pitch, and I say, "Oh, that's a very interesting idea, but I want to see a build." And then fast forward a year right now, or like 9 months after, I bump into you in another game event, and then we are continuing conversation. You're looking for the same funding, but now you have a build. And then, okay, let's talk more. I want to play your build. And then once I play a build, I like it, and then we bring it forward to the next stage. Or if let's say that it is not good enough yet, then we will provide you with feedback, how you can improve further, or it is just generally not a right fit for us. We may also introduce you to a different publisher, for example, that would fit the genre or the ticket size that you're looking for. Or we will also organize event. We would let you know of like this kind of opportunity in the air. But on the general thing is that
Yeah.
we see potential in a studio. We invited them to Umo Game Conference, and they get to meet the publisher and investor there. And in the end, they were able to get a deal.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I think it's something that's not supposed to be downplayed anymore. Like networking is the most important thing that you need to do if you really want to be able to land deals. So now let's try to reverse it back a little bit. So developers would usually be desperate for cash, but they should be like vetting on you too. So what are the red flags that developers should look for in publishers or investors?
So this is something that we always tell studio and advise them to do, is to do cost reference with the friends in the industry. I mean is that reach out to studio that who work with the publisher or the investor that you are in talk with, including ourselves as well. So most of the studio would open their to share their experience of a lot of working with the publisher and investor. And developers should always do their own diligence on the publisher and investor. And some of the red flag would be when you go into a meeting with them, they don't know what they're doing. So
Mm-hmm.
let's say you're asked for a marketing strategy and then they come up with some bullshit stuff that even you as a developer would know that it's bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Then
Yeah,
that's a big no-no. Aggressive recoup term, like 100-0, for example.
that is impressive.
We've seen that as well. But of course, that again, it comes down to how you negotiate and how much money and the risk that involved. But then, of course, aggressive recoup term will be one of it. Lack of transparency.
Mm-hmm.
What you're doing is different from what you're saying as well. Over promising on the distribution. So we have seen publishers that say that they would do X amount of exposure, but in the end they weren't able to do it. So that's how we see that as a red flag as well.
I see.
One thing that I would say that in this is you as a developer, you're looking a partner when you're looking for an investor and publisher. You're not looking a people that can just put in money. You
Mm-hmm.
want a partner that is able to at least bring you one of the following, whether it is expertise,
Mm-hmm.
network, or just a good partnership. We
Mm-hmm.
have seen studio that partner with publisher that was having so much headache is because of too much control.
Mm-hmm.
Like a good partnership, let's say ideally, is that the studio focus on the production and the creative direction, and the publisher do the distribution and marketing, right? If a publisher start to get involved in the creative direction, get involved in a lot of the production decision, then it is kind of controlling the direction of the studio already. And that would potentially affect the final game that is being made. It might no longer the vision of what the studio want in the end. So these
Mm-hmm.
are like the major red flag that each developer should do when they are talking with publisher.
I see. Do developers should also likewise do due diligence with publishers as well, the same way that publishers would do due diligence with them. Okay, so next up. So for a dev that's failing to scale, so when is the right time to give up a portion of revenue to a publisher just to survive? Like for example, developers who probably may have made games before, but they're struggling to push it out there. They may have the financial finances themselves, but they just can't get the numbers. So yeah, when is the right time for them to give up that portion of the revenue for publishers?
So I will see there's two part of this question. So again, famous answer, it depends.
Mm-hmm.
So the first part of the answer is that it depends whether the studio themselves actually have the financial. So we see like studio that launch a successful game, now they are making two games at the same time. It doesn't matter of like they have a set budget. They don't want to increase the budget to increase the risk. And now they want a publisher to come in to help them in what they are lacking, and of course cover the additional, whether it is marketing or development funding, right? So that is
Yeah.
the option one. And with that, is usually as soon as you know that you need it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Okay.
And then the other answer is that if you are a studio that doesn't have the financial, like further financial, this is the only game that you have been making, and you have been burning your own capital, your own money, or angel investor money up until this point. Now you need to find a publisher and investor to give you additional funding to continue develop the game or launch it to the market per se. Then I would say minimum you need to have at least 6 months runway,
Mm-hmm.
and if possible have 9. So 9 to 6 remaining runway would be the spot where you start go out and look for the opportunity, because that usually a publishing deal, even though it move fast, it would take 2 to 3 months at least. And
Mm-hmm.
if it's longer, 4 to 5. So that's why a minimum 6 months of runway.
I see, I see. So let's look at, like, for example, for studios that are self-publishing, what are like the non-negotiable financial indicators that they need to track to make sure they're to ensure their sustainability and they're not gonna be just a one-hit wonder?
That's a difficult question to answer because that there's always outlier.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
again, it depends because you cannot have a blanket answer on this. But on a general metric that you need to track is development burn rate. So that is the
Mm-hmm.
first thing. Second is that the marketing or the UA costs. Like money can buy attraction, but not interest. Like
Mm-hmm.
how you gonna convert them, and whether it is the right user to convert as well, and
Mm-hmm.
which leads to the sales conversion, whether it's market to sales conversion, whether it's wish list to sales conversion. So that's
Mm-hmm.
something that you need to track. And then the last that I could think of would be the break even,
Mm-hmm.
like how long it would take for you to break even, how many copies that you need to break even, for example.
I see. I see. So that's the last of my questions, but I want to like follow up on that last one. So, for example, what action would you recommend studios to take if they want to be able to like self-publish? Like maybe publishing is not for everyone, but for developer studios that are wanting to self-publish and not be under a publisher, what is the one action that you want them to take at day one, especially since we talked about Inception Publishing earlier as well?
I think generally I would say reach out to agency if let's say you want to self publish, is because it will save you a lot of resources and whether it is time or whether it is money if you want to do self-publishing. So one example that I would say is that imagine it this way, that you're new and you're doing so many things already. You're building a game. There's like audio, there's like graphic, visual, there's like game mechanic, design of the game level and whatnot already. There's so many things that's happening in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Now you want to self-publish, you have to talk with a big piece of another different ball game where you have to do influencer campaign, you have to either do community management, you either have to do marketing campaign, how you buy the ads, where you want to show the ads, you want to do the graphic for it, you want to do like how to attract the eyeballs so that people play your game, monetization, and all this kind of stuff, which you can pay a small fee, whether it's a rev share or a retainer to an agency, and they would give you a proposal to
Mm-hmm.
save you so much time and resources.
All right. So with that, let's head on to our like quick fire round with our closing question. So one, what's one financial term that every creative or development lead should understand?
I think generally burn rate
Burn
or
rate.
runway. Yeah. I think generally that if you don't have a finance person in your team, which I see a lot of studio doesn't have, you need to know that how many more months your studio can survive financially with the decision that you are making.
Mm-hmm.
Because that we see people that I want to hire this guy because I need a sound guy or I need to hire a QA guy. But you forgot that you only have a fixed budget. If you hire more people, which means that you have to put them on your payroll, and that will significantly cut down your runway. And instead, there are studios that do contracted or
Mm-hmm.
they do part time, they do a one off gig. So a lot of this kind of decision you need to make, but you need to know how much money you have and how much money you're paying out every single month, whether you're paying for rent, whether you're paying for payroll, whether you're paying for software.
All right. So next up, speaking of burn rate or runway, what's the best advice that you could give to a developer that's currently struggling with their finances?
I think the one thing that I see a lot of indie game studio is that they treat it like a project instead of a real business. So I would advise that start treating it like a business, like running a company. And once you treat them like a business and secure the funding, that is when the creativity thrive. Because that I see that a lot of people in the game industry is stressed with joining a early startup studio, an indie studio that is not financial stable. They wouldn't able to deliver the work they are able to because they are thinking about that whether they have food on the plate tomorrow or the week after. So I would say the best advice is that start building it like a business, building it like a company. Think of it that if you want an angel investor, you want a VC to come to invest in, you have a company rated, you have a clean cap table for them, and you have a valuation in mind and treat
All
it like
right.
a business.
All right. Interesting. So final question. What game do you most often recommend to everybody that you meet?
There's actually a lot. So it very depend on the people that I'm talking with. I think generally that I have been recommending people play Black Myth Wukong a lot in the past 1.5 years now. Why I recommend that is because that Black Myth Wukong is one of the best example of how a new strong IP that get executed well can become a memorable experience. And well, sorry to say, again, I don't want to get cancer.
It's okay.
We have been seeing a lot of Western IP that we have dwarf, we have orcs, we have dragons. Like these are the stuff that we have been seeing back to back.
Mm-hmm.
With Black Myth Wukong, it's just a different take, and especially that I am from Asia and we have the Monkey King story or backstory, so it's pretty refreshing to see that it's appearing as a IP in the gaming industry that
All
was
right.
made in
Yeah.
China.
Yeah. And it's interesting that to see players and a lot of Asian IP are also starting to be recognized on the global stage. Like, for example, the movies, K-pop Demon Hunters, and all that stuff. So, yeah, that is interesting. I just want to sneak in a question. Not Final Fantasy X, because I could get by your name. It could be Final Fantasy X, but I guess not. Anyway, all right. I think that's it for the episode. Thank you so much for joining us here, Tidus. And we really learned a lot with a lot of the stuff that you shared here. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Happy to help.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you liked that episode. If you learned something valuable from this episode, please subscribe and share it with someone building a game right now. If you'd like to support the show, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/GameDevEpicFails. That is patreon.com/GameDevEpicFails. Your support helps us keep the podcast running and turn real lessons into tools that reduce wasted years for indie game developers. And if you're building an early stage game and you want proof of an audience before you commit years of work, pitch your game at pitch.ludolaunchpad.com. That is pitch.ludolaunchpad.com. See you in the next episode. Thank you.